In a small town surrounded by rolling hills and dense forests, everyone knew Sheriff Greg Dawson. He was a man of the law, stern yet respected. But behind the badge and the firm handshakes, there was a side of him few ever saw. A side that only his daughter, Emma, truly knew. Emma was a bright, spirited 18-year-old with dreams that stretched far beyond the confines of their quiet town. She loved art, music, and the idea of exploring the world. But her father, ever the enforcer of rules, had different plans for her. He wanted Emma to follow in his footsteps, to join the police force, and continue the family legacy of upholding justice. "I don't want to be a cop, Dad," Emma said one evening, her voice steady but firm. They were sitting at the dinner table, the smell of roasted chicken filling the air. Sheriff Dawson frowned, his fork pausing midair. "Emma, this isn't just about you. It's about tradition, about doing what's right for the community." Emma clenched her fists under the table. "What's right for the community isn't what's right for me. I want to live my life, not yours." The conversation escalated quickly. Sheriff Dawson's temper flared, his voice rising as he tried to assert his authority. Emma, however, refused to back down. Her words cut through the air like sharp knives, challenging everything he had ever believed in. Then it happened. In a moment of frustration, he slammed his hand down on the table. Emma flinched, not from fear, but from the weight of the moment. The sheriff's hand didn't strike her, but his words felt just as heavy. "Enough," he bellowed. "You will respect this family and its values, Emma, whether you like it or not." Tears welled up in Emma's eyes, but she refused to let them fall. She pushed back her chair, grabbed her coat, and stormed out of the house. The cold night air bit at her cheeks as she wandered aimlessly down the dark streets of the town. She didn't know where she was going, only that she couldn't stay there. Her father's words echoed in her mind, each one a reminder of the rift that now separated them. As she walked, a familiar voice called out from behind her, "Emma, wait." It was Sam, her childhood friend, and the only person in town who truly understood her. Sam had always been there for her, through every argument with her dad, every moment of doubt. "What happened?" Sam asked, concern etched on his face. Emma sighed, her breath visible in the crisp air. "He doesn't get it, Stan. He doesn't understand me." Sam nodded, his eyes filled with understanding. "Maybe it's not about him understanding. Maybe it's about showing him who you really are." Emma looked at Sam, her heart heavy yet hopeful. She didn't know how to bridge the gap with her father, but she knew she couldn't give up. Not on her dreams, and not on the possibility of making him see her for who she truly was. The morning sun painted the sky in soft orange hues as Emma sat on the bench near the town park, her knees pulled up to her chest. She hadn't gone home after the argument with her father. The thought of facing him again so soon felt unbearable. The peaceful chirping of birds was the only thing calming her racing thoughts. Sam sat beside her, a comforting presence in the silence. He handed her a steaming cup of coffee he grabbed from the diner down the street. "Here," he said softly, "you look like you need this." Emma took the cup, managing a small smile. "Thanks, Sam." Sam leaned back, his hands resting on the bench. "You know, your dad isn't a bad guy, Emma. He's just stuck in his ways." Emma sighed. "I know he cares, but he doesn't see me, Sam. He only sees what he wants me to be." Sam nodded. "Sometimes, people just need a reminder that there's more than one way to live a good life. Maybe you could show him." Emma frowned, staring into her coffee. "How am I supposed to do that when he won't even listen to me?" Before Sam could answer, the sound of distant sirens broke the calm. Both of them turned toward the source of the noise. 2 police cars sped past the park, their lights flashing. Sam raised an eyebrow. "Looks like something serious is going on." Emma felt a twinge of curiosity. Growing up as the sheriff's daughter, she'd always been aware of the happenings around town. Even though she didn't want to follow in her father's footsteps, part of her still cared about the people in the community. "I wonder what it is," she said, standing up. Sam shrugged. We could check it out. You know, from a safe distance. Emma hesitated, then nodded. Okay, let's go. They followed the flashing lights down Main Street, careful not to get too close. Soon, they arrived at the scene. A small jewelry store with shattered windows. A group of officers was securing the area while a crowd of curious townsfolk gathered nearby. Emma's heart sank when she spotted her father. Sheriff Dawson was in the middle of it all, barking orders to his team. His face was etched with tension as he tried to take control of the chaotic scene. Emma and Sam stayed on the edge of the crowd, watching quietly. For the first time, Emma noticed something she hadn't seen before. Her father wasn't just enforcing rules. He was protecting people. The way he spoke to the store owner, reassuring her despite the loss, showed a side of him she rarely acknowledged. Looks like your dad has a lot on his plate, Sam said. Emma nodded, a mix of emotions swirling inside her. Maybe she hadn't been completely fair to him. Maybe there was more to being the sheriff than she'd realized. As they turned to leave, Sheriff Dawson's eyes met Emma's. For a brief moment, neither of them said a word. But in that fleeting glance, something unspoken passed between them. A spark of understanding, or perhaps the beginning of one. Later that evening, Emma sat on the edge of her bed, her thoughts tangled like a ball of yarn. She couldn't shake the look her father had given her at the scene of the robbery. It wasn't anger or frustration. It was something softer, something she hadn't seen in him for a long time. Her phone buzzed on the nightstand, pulling her out of her thoughts. She grabbed it and saw a text from Sam. Hey, just checking on you. You okay? She smiled faintly and typed back, yeah, just thinking. Thanks for today. After hitting send, she leaned back on her bed, staring at the ceiling. Her father's job was hard. She could see that now. But it didn't mean he had the right to push his expectations onto her. Still, a part of her wondered if she'd ever find a way to make him understand her dreams. The sound of footsteps outside her door broke her train of thought. A knock followed. Emma, can I come in? It was her father's voice, hesitant and unfamiliar in its gentleness. Emma sat up, her heart pounding. Yeah, come in. Sheriff Dawson stepped into the room, his face etched with exhaustion but softer than usual. He closed the door behind him and stood there for a moment, as if searching for the right words. About last night, he began, his voice quieter than she'd ever heard it. I've been thinking about what you said. Emma folded her arms, unsure where this was going. And he sighed, running a hand through his graying hair. I didn't mean to lose my temper. I was wrong to try to force my plans onto you. Emma blinked, surprised. She hadn't expected him to admit that. But he continued, You've got to understand, Emma. This job, it's not just a career. It's a way of life. Protecting this town, these people, it's who I am. And I thought, maybe it could be who you are too. Emma looked at him, her defenses slowly crumbling. I know, Dad, and I respect what you do. But I'm not you. I have my own dreams, my own path. He nodded, his eyes meeting hers. I see that now. I want you to be safe. This world isn't always kind, Emma. I worry about you. For the first time in a long while, Emma felt the weight of her father's concern. It wasn't about control. It was about love. I know, Dad, she said softly, but you have to trust me to find my way. Sheriff Dawson sighed again, but this time it sounded more like acceptance. He reached out, placing a hand on her shoulder. I'll try. I can't promise I'll get it right, but I'll try. Emma smiled, a small but genuine smile. That's all I ask. As her father left the room, Emma felt a flicker of hope. Maybe things wouldn't change overnight, but they were changing. And for the first time, she felt like they were on the same side. The days following Emma's talk with her father felt different. There was a cautious but noticeable shift between them, like two strangers slowly learning to understand each other. Sheriff Dawson wasn't as commanding, and Emma found herself less defensive. One afternoon, Emma sat on the porch sketching in her notebook. Drawing had always been her way of escaping, a place where she could dream and create without limits. She was working on a piece inspired by the forest near the edge of town when her father's patrol car pulled into the driveway. He stepped out, his boots crunching on the gravel. Instead of heading inside as he usually did, he hesitated, looking at her. "What are you working on?" he asked, his voice casual but curious. Emma glanced up, surprised by the question. "Just a drawing," she said, holding up her notebook. Sheriff Dawson walked closer, leaning over to take a look. His eyebrows raised slightly as he studied the intricate details of the trees and the sunlight breaking through the leaves. "That's really good," he said, his tone genuine. "I didn't know you could draw like that." Emma smiled, a little shy under his praise. "Thanks. It's something I've always loved doing." He nodded, then leaned against the porch railing. "You know, when I was your age, I didn't think I'd end up being the sheriff. I wanted to be a carpenter. Loved working with my hands, building things." Emma stared at him, surprised. "Really? I never knew that." He chuckled, a hint of nostalgia in his voice. "Yeah, but life had other plans. My dad, your grandpa, was the sheriff before me. He didn't exactly give me a choice. I guess I didn't want to disappoint him." Emma set her notebook down, the connection between them suddenly clearer. "Is that why you wanted me to join the force? So I wouldn't disappoint you?" Sheriff Dawson sighed, his eyes distant. "Maybe. But I see now that it's not fair to put that on you. You're not me, Emma. And that's okay." For the first time, Emma felt like her father truly saw her, not as the daughter he wanted her to be, but as the person she was. Their conversation was interrupted by a call on his radio. A voice crackled through, reporting a missing hiker in the forest near town. Sheriff Dawson's expression immediately shifted to concern. "I've got to go," he said, already heading toward his car. But then he paused and turned back. "You want to come? I could use an extra set of eyes." Emma hesitated. She wasn't sure if this was his way of pulling her into his world again, but the sincerity in his voice made her nod. "Sure, I'll come." As they drove toward the forest, Emma couldn't help but feel that this was the start of something new, a chance to rebuild their relationship, not as sheriff and daughter, but as two people trying to understand each other. The forest loomed ahead, its towering trees casting long shadows as the late afternoon sun dipped lower. Emma sat quietly in the passenger seat of her father's patrol car, the radio crackling with updates from other officers. Her father's focus was sharp, his eyes scanning the road as they approached the search site. "Here's the plan," Sheriff Dawson said, breaking the silence. "The hiker was last seen near the North Trail. We'll start there and split up if we need to cover more ground." Emma nodded, her heart pounding slightly. This wasn't just a walk in the woods. Someone's life might depend on what they did next. When they arrived, several officers were already gathered near the trailhead, coordinating the search. Emma followed her father as he spoke to one of them, quickly gathering the details. A young man, about her age, had wandered off the marked path while hiking with friends. He hadn't been seen for hours, and nightfall was fast approaching. "Emma," her father said, turning to her, "stay close and keep an eye out for anything unusual. Yell if you see or hear something." Emma nodded, swallowing her nerves. She wasn't sure what she was doing here, but she trusted her instincts, and, surprisingly, her father. They ventured into the forest, the sound of crunching leaves and distant bird calls filling the air. Emma's eyes darted around, searching for any sign of the missing hiker. Her father walked a few steps ahead, his flashlight cutting through the shadows. As they moved deeper into the woods, Emma couldn't help but admire her father's calm demeanor. This was his element where he thrived. He wasn't just a man with a badge. He was someone who truly cared about protecting others. "Over here," a voice shouted in the distance. Sheriff Dawson motioned for Emma to stay put before moving quickly toward the sound. But Emma, feeling a sudden tug of curiosity and concern, followed him at a safe distance. They reached a steep slope, and at the bottom, one of the officers had found a backpack tangled in some bushes. It belonged to the missing hiker. "This means he's close," Sheriff Dawson said, his voice firm. He turned to Emma. "Stay here while we check further down." Emma nodded, but as her father and the other officers descended the slope, she felt a strange unease. Something caught her eye, a faint trail of disturbed leaves leading in the opposite direction. She hesitated, glancing toward her father, then back at the trail. Trusting her gut, she decided to follow it, calling out as she walked. "Hello, can you hear me?" The forest seemed to hold its breath for a moment. Then a faint, weak voice responded. "Help, over here." Emma's heart leaped. She followed the voice, and there, slumped against a tree, was the missing hiker. He looked exhausted but alive. Without hesitation, she yelled back toward her father. "I found him. Over here." Her father's head snapped up, and within moments, he was by her side, his face a mixture of relief and pride. "You did good, Emma," he said, his voice steady but warm. For the first time, Emma felt like she wasn't just his daughter, she was his equal. The hiker, a young man named Jake, was weak and disoriented but relieved to be found. Emma stayed by his side while her father called for medical assistance over the radio. The other officers soon arrived, helping Jake onto a stretcher as they prepared to take him back to safety. "Thank you," Jake whispered, his voice barely audible. His eyes met Emma's, gratitude shining through despite his exhaustion. "You're going to be okay," Emma said softly, offering him a reassuring smile. Inside, she felt a strange sense of accomplishment, a feeling she hadn't expected to experience out here in the middle of the woods. As the team carried Jake back toward the trailhead, Sheriff Dawson fell into step beside Emma. His usual stern expression had softened, and for a moment, they walked in silence. Finally, he spoke. "You did something incredible back there, Emma," he said, his voice filled with pride. "If you hadn't trusted your instincts, we might not have found him in time." Emma looked at him, surprised by the compliment. "I just followed the trail. It wasn't a big deal." "It was a big deal," her father insisted. "You didn't just find Jake. You showed courage and quick thinking. Those are the qualities of someone who cares about helping others." Emma didn't know how to respond. She had always seen herself as different from her father, but in this moment, she realized they might have more in common than she thought. When they reached the trailhead, an ambulance was waiting. The paramedics quickly took Jake inside, and the officers began wrapping up the search operation. Emma leaned against the patrol car, watching as her father spoke to his team. He seemed calmer, more at ease than she had ever seen him. Sam arrived a few minutes later, out of breath but visibly relieved. "I heard what happened. You found the guy?" he asked, his eyes wide with admiration. Emma nodded, a small smile tugging at her lips. "Yeah, I did." Sam grinned. "That's amazing, Emma. You're like a hero or something." She rolled her eyes playfully, but couldn't hide the warmth she felt at his words. For the first time, she began to see herself differently, not as the rebellious daughter or the outsider, but as someone capable of making a difference. Her father approached, his expression thoughtful. "You know," he said, addressing both Emma and Sam, "today reminded me of something important. Helping people isn't about wearing a badge or following tradition. It's about heart. And Emma, you've got plenty of that." Emma blinked, caught off guard by his sincerity. "Thanks, Dad," she said quietly. "That means a lot." The drive home was peaceful, the forest fading into the distance as they returned to town. Emma glanced at her father, who seemed lost in thought. She didn't know what the future held, but for the first time in a long while, she felt like they were on the same page. As they pulled into the driveway, Sheriff Dawson turned to her. "You know, Emma, whatever you choose to do with your life, I'll support you. I just want you to be happy." Emma smiled, her heart lighter than it had been in years. "I will, Dad. And maybe, just maybe, I'll surprise you again someday." The following morning, The sun shone brightly, casting warm light over the town. Emma stood on the porch with her sketchbook in hand, feeling a rare sense of peace. The events of the previous day still lingered in her mind. For the first time, she felt like she had bridged a gap with her father, one she wasn't sure could ever be crossed. Sheriff Dawson joined her on the porch, holding 2 steaming mugs of coffee. He handed one to her without a word, then leaned against the railing, looking out at the quiet street. "Big day yesterday," he said after a moment. Emma nodded, sipping her coffee. "Yeah, it was." He turned to her, his face thoughtful. "You know, I've been thinking about what you said, about wanting to live your own life. I want you to know that I get it now. You have your own path to follow, and I'm proud of you, no matter what that looks like." Emma smiled, a wave of relief washing over her. "Thanks, Dad. That means a lot." He chuckled. "Just don't expect me to stop worrying about you. That's part of the job description as a dad." Emma laughed softly, feeling the tension between them finally dissolve. Later that day, the two of them drove into town together. Sheriff Dawson had to visit the station, and Emma wanted to stop by the art supply store. On the way, they passed a bulletin board near the town square, where a crowd had gathered. Curious, they pulled over. As they approached, Emma noticed a familiar face on the board, a photo of her and her father, taken at the scene of the rescue the previous evening. Below it was a handwritten note. "Thank you, Sheriff Dawson and Emma, for saving my life. I'll never forget your kindness and bravery. Jake." Emma's cheeks flushed as she read the words. She hadn't expected any recognition, let alone something so public. Her father patted her shoulder. "Looks like you've made an impression, kiddo." Emma smiled, feeling a mix of embarrassment and pride. "We both did," she said. That evening, as they sat down for dinner, Emma felt a sense of warmth and connection she hadn't felt in years. They talked about everything and nothing. Memories, plans, and dreams. For once, there was no pressure, no expectations, just a father and daughter enjoying each other's company. After the dishes were cleared, Sheriff Dawson leaned back in his chair and looked at Emma. "So, what's next for you? Any big plans?" Emma thought for a moment, then grinned. "I don't know yet, but whatever it is, I think I'll figure it out." He nodded, a proud smile on his face. "I have no doubt you will." As Emma headed to bed that night, she felt a newfound sense of confidence and clarity. She didn't have all the answers, but she knew one thing for sure. She was ready to take on whatever came next, and for the first time, she knew her father would be right there cheering her on.